Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Hope you guys are all hail hearty and enjoying our current situation the way we are. Uh, a big thank you first to start off with to the entire AwesomeConf team for getting this done online. Uh, uh, we couldn't have a actual conference where we could have met each other, but unfortunately, situation demands such that we stay away as much as possible. So our panel today is going to be talking on the plateau of learning, and it's something that I guess pretty much everyone goes through in their career, which is be it in their first 2 years, 5 years, or maybe even after 10 years, where you start wondering, what's the next thing I can do to get better. Uh, so just a quick brief on how the panel is going to go. We have 60 minutes where we have some questions which, as the organizers, we've discussed and formed, and you guys we'll be discussing those first. And then in the last 15 minutes, there'll be a Q&A where you guys can ask questions, probably on the YouTube chat, and that will be forwarded to the panelists here. So we've got three speakers who've done some great work in different fields, from software engineering to actually forming companies to hiring employees to making big teams. So I'm sure some of the insights that they provide is something which will be useful for many of us. So we have Manideep from Hotstar, Sanket from Geeky Ants, and Tanmay from Asura. So hi guys, how is it going? How are you all doing?
Hi, folks. All good?
As good as you can in lockdown.
All good,
Hey
as good as you can. What are the new things you all learned in this lockdown except the tech part? Did any of you learn how to cook or something? Like, or are you guys in? Where are you guys? Are you all in your hometowns or are you all somewhere else?
not in my hometown. I have been cooking a lot, and
Oh,
I've also signed up for a piano app. So
oh,
learning.
oh, that's nice. That's nice. Good, good. What about other you two? Are you guys learning, doing
I'm uh,
anything?
I'm currently in Bangalore, and
Okay.
my my new thing has been Fortnite. I have
Oh,
never
okay.
played. I have never played one of these massively online MMORPG type things before. So
Okay.
this was quite fascinating.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm at my
So,
hometown and playing PUBG with my cousins these days.
oh, very good. Family reunion, huh? Nice. Good, good. All right, so we'll just start right away as we have some questions which, as I said, as organizers we formed, and we like to discuss those first, and uh, then we'll open it out for the audience to start. So each of you have been doing work in very diverse fields, though the core of it is still technology and design. But the products that you guys work on, be it Geeky and Hotstar or on Hasura, are very diverse. I mean, they're completely opposite ends. So just, you guys can start with how has your journey been so far, maybe till this point or before. So how have you guys come up to here? Like, we can start with you, Sanket, first.
Yeah, hello everyone. So a little bit of intro. I'm Sanket, founder and CEO at Geeky Ants. My journey has been quite different, I would say. I started coding quite early in my life. My dad picked up. Uh, Actually, my dad started teaching computers out of passion, and that's where I picked up coding. And QBasic was the first language which I learned, and from there I built some little apps, not apps. We used to call it like command line programs. It was just MS DOS, and that's where it all started. From there, Windows came and Visual Basic, and then web happened. So my learning journey has been from there to now, which is more of like React Native, and Flutter and Svelte these days. So yeah, that's the journey what I have been through.
Mhm. Okay. Mandeep, how about you? Mandeep?
Yeah, I done electrical engineering as part of college. Didn't want to get into jobs related to that
Okay.
after the internship I've had in Bangalore, and I actually joined as a research assistant in traction design. Uh, in a design school after that, and from then on, I had built up fascination about these websites and apps they were building, and then I got to build them as a freelancer, a lot of them, and then joined Head Out at Bangalore. A couple of years of stint there, and then joined Hotstar.
Okay.
Great,
Tanmay.
folks. I'm Tanmay. I'm one of the founders and CEO at Hasuro. I studied I started coding fairly late in my life. I started coding only after I joined university. In university, I studied computer science. I did my bachelor's and master's, and as a part of my master's, I actually focused on computer vision, machine learning, and then soon after that, I consulted in the machine learning space for about a year or so, and then I realized that I kind of don't want to do this anymore, and I shifted gears towards software engineering. I started a consulting firm, and I started consulting myself and started a consulting firm with my core team. And we did that for a few years. Hasura, the technology came out of that consulting work that we did, and so kind of as that consulting firm matured, we took the really hard decision for us. It was a big moment for us to kind of move from that company to shutting that firm down, which had just started becoming like profitable, and fairly financially successful. So we had to take this hard decision of shutting that firm down, taking the core team out, and then starting Hasura, which was about 2 years ago. But yes, that's roughly me. I from mm, a technology point of view, I'm a fairly full stack engineer. I primarily um, during a few till a few years ago, my areas of expertise were primarily on the infrastructure side. So a lot of Docker, Kubernetes, um, backend stuff, working with databases. And over the last few years, it's become more on the front end side of things. But I would still consider myself just as an intermediate engineer on these things. I wouldn't consider myself an expert on a lot of these topics. So I'm full stack, and all of the good and bad things that come with full stack, right? Which means full stack means like you're like jack of all trades. It's a nice way of saying that. It's like, yeah,
Yeah.
give me Stack Overflow, I can build whatever. So so that's me.
Nice. So full stack is like the all-rounder we have in cricket if you're playing. Like, but that's nice actually, because these are three very different journeys. I'm sure Manvi being the youngest, with having just started, and you two have probably spent more time and in the industry. This thing. So there are three very diverse journeys. Trying to do good things, of course, in their own fields. So as you guys, when you all started your careers, you started learning, and to where you all have reached now, right? You guys must have at some point realized that okay, maybe I'm not learning enough, or I am the work that I'm doing is the same as it always is, or there's a monotony in it. So how would you, in your respective fields or wherever, define that? Okay, I'm going through a plateaued phase in my career, or in the way I deal with people, or at work. I'm going through a plateaued phase. Anyone can. Let's go
Yeah.
with Manjeet this time. You can start.
Yeah, so I would typically term it as comfort zone. I think a lot of people use that term. You're fairly comfortable at your workday, typical workday, and you're not pushing yourself as much. I think that would start getting repetitive, and you won't be growing as a person or a professional career as much. I would say. I think Sanket or Tanmay will be able to add more on this.
Yeah.
Anyone?
Yeah, Sanket.
So I had hit my plateau. I remember when it was around 2011, 12, sort of. Actually, uh, when jQuery and Angular happened, that transition phase, I was actually pursuing my engineering back then. And ironically, when I was pursuing my engineering, I had hit the plateau of learning. And it took me a little while to come back to that learning phase. I got active on Twitter and started speaking to many people, and started speaking to who I looked up to, and also came across a lot of things like how Angular rendering happened, and then the React community blew it up completely with the meetups organized by Kiran. And I remember meeting Tanmay and Rajoshi a couple of years back when they shifted to Bangalore. That was a phase when meetups were getting really hot here in Bangalore, and that blew me up totally. Like how you can interact with people here in Bangalore and maybe overseas and travel to different countries, and then keep that learning on. So that has worked really well. Twitter has been an inspiration. Follow great people and keep checking what they are doing every day. It's sometimes draining, but it's also inspiring most of the times.
That's yeah. That I think to kind of add to what the others have said. I think the for me, it's been more of a problem of um, uh, learning fast enough, which is not so more than a problem of kind of like um, uh, being stuck in a particular rut of like that I'm doing like a continuous set of things and not learning anything more. It's been more that, I mean, that's kind of been the nature of the way I've been working over the last few years. But it's basically more of an issue of like there's so many things out there, and the speed at which you need to know those things and be productive with them, that requirement is so kind of urgent and severe that it's been literally more of a thing of like learning fast enough, both on the technical and non-technical side, more than it has been of like the lack of opportunity of learning. So the plateau has kind of been more of a internal learning curve plateau thing that you need to keep steep, right? It's like you need to feel like you're like 21 all the time, and you can keep learning fast enough. So that has been kind of um, the most challenging bit over the last few years. Yeah.
I just want to put a positive spin on doing the same thing again and again. I think sometimes you need to do that to master something.
Exactly.
It's not that like,
Right.
yeah, but if you do it after a certain point, you get to like marginal benefits, right? So at that point, you might want to switch something up.
Right. So you guys also rightly mentioned about learning all the time, and seeing the way the industry and the ecosystem keeps changing, right? Especially with the way front end is working right now, the opinionated things that come in and go out. Can it also be intimidating for someone who wants to learn to start with? That there's like a barrage of information and you don't know what to actually take so that it helps you out.
It happens a lot. I think in JavaScript, there's this term called JavaScript fatigue,
Right.
and every day you see a new framework and new library coming in. It can be really intimidating for any new one coming in the ecosystem, right? But there's a way out. You can have a look at most of the things on the surface and deep dive into only the things which you really need at the moment to build stuff. And that's how we usually do, especially not just JavaScript. If you see Flutter, Svelte, these are fast evolving technologies. How do you keep a track of that? So I don't learn all those things in depth, all of them. Just one is fine. Like full stack for just one stack is good, and then go ahead and just get to know the architecture and the surface knowledge of the other technologies. That's how I do.
All right.
Yeah, I think
Oh,
I think I think you hit upon a really good point. I think it's very um I definitely think there's a tremendous amount of like if I was a front end engineer today, and I was kind of building my career in front end, and I just started today, I would be shit scared, and I would have massive FOMO whatever I was doing, right? Even if I was like on React, and JavaScript and doing whatever, I would still have, and using TypeScript and React and being very comfortable with the latest React, whatever, I would still have a massive amount of FOMO because there's so many different frameworks, so many
Right.
different approaches, there's so many different things to learn that it is definitely very intimidating. So yeah, I think those early, those first few stages of your career where you can be in an environment that somehow you're able to kind of like dive deeper into your particular stack, and then calmly kind of like go through these other technologies and learn them and like understand how to navigate this is very important, because otherwise, yeah, otherwise it's definitely a little bit scary. I mean, I don't know
Right.
how people deal with it today. I would just be like, what is
Yeah,
happening?
Right.
it's definitely stressful, right? Like there are so many things. I mean, from an Android perspective, Google releases like a library or new way to do things like every 2 3 months, right? They have a massive team working for on tools that help the developers, and if you are not on top of it, you feel like uh, you're uh, you're you're slowing yourself down, or uh, you're lagging. But I would say I think the perspective that you need to learn X number of things, or you need to catch up on all the things, which is impossible, to be frank. Uh, it doesn't help. Like it really stresses you out. I think what helped me was focusing on solving the problems. If something helps you solve the problem that you're trying to solve, pick it up, learn it. At one point, we didn't know anything, right? Like we were able to pick up like in a few days or something. But I think focusing more on problems helped me uh, uh, say to myself that okay, I know enough to like get this done, right? I think that helps a lot in easing that stress.
All right. And I think if you guys, like just you three, if you guys want to learn something and you all feel, oh, let me pick up something or try a POC or do a hackathon or something, do you guys have like a defined method of learning something? Like, do you prefer seeing a video tutorial or the documentation, or do you all follow anything in specific to learn something new? If you guys,
So I usually pick up the documentation and then go ahead and do maybe a to do app or something. That's how I start with most of the technologies. So, and if I have to go a bit deeper, then probably a side project. As Manideep mentioned, you have to build something to learn a specific technology. So side project experiments, and experiments leads to exploration. That's what we do usually.
right? All right.
Yeah, for me that has mostly been it's mostly been a story of like necessity is the mother of invention types. So basically like I have to learn something new because it's in front of me. It needs to be done. And so it's usually been motivated by that. And very similar to what Sanket said, if it's a technology thing, or if it's a new kind of engineering or a technical thing, then you have to get a little bit hands-on with it, and understand its first principles. I have a I It's not particularly insightful, but it might be useful to other people. But my a method of learning that I try to follow is I I call it kind of design thinking. I don't know if that's the right word, but that's the best phrase that I have for it, which is basically to kind of understand, if I'm learning something new, the fastest way for me to absorb that is to understand why that thing that I'm learning was built in that particular way. So why is this why is this framework built like this? Why is this programming language designed like this? Or why is this particular technology like this? Why has it been designed like this by its creators? What are its kind of like underlying principles, right? And then as soon as I can kind of connect that concept to other first principles that exist, it becomes really easy for me to understand where it fits and where it doesn't fit. Um, and then I can very rapidly kind of get productive with it. So understanding kind of its trade-offs, the pros and cons of like why it behaves in a particular way, why its designers built it in a particular way, right? Why the APIs are structured in a particular way. All of that kind of really helps me understand how to use how to use that particular technology. I don't know if I'm being very vague, but yeah, that
No, no,
No,
I think Tanmay, you hit it on like out of the park, to be frank. Like I echo that same sentiment, like understanding why a tool is built and what it is supposed to be solving for someone who is trying to make something. I think I value that so much. Like I make it as part of my requirements for hiring, right? Like when someone says they've used something, I really look for that understanding of the tools that they have. And just to get on to the learning method topic, I think it is really intimidating at the start when you look at something very, very new. Like especially like a new paradigm of coding, right? For example, like for someone who hasn't done React or Flutter or anything like Swift UI or anything of that sorts, component atomic design stuff, it is really intimidating. Like you need to probably videos help me a lot in getting familiar with something very new in the start. I can go at my own pace, right? Pause, rewind whenever I want. And then, of course, as Sanket and Tanmay mentioned, just have to start building something to really understand why it is made and what it's good for.
all right.
It's like if it is like the first of its kind, then probably you need to learn in and out and the concepts, everything. But if it is like something similar, what you've already learned, it's like learning a new musical instrument and then learning the second one. You can get the same principles, right? So I agree with all of you. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so now if we think about or we discuss at what it is when you want to learn at work, right? Because when you're working on something, your sprint tasks, your features, after some time you will definitely want to do something so that at the end of the day you've learned something, be it some new technology or some form of optimization or things like that. So this is mainly to just try and get an idea on if you had to encourage yourself to learn more at work. For example, think of something like in a sprint, I spend 70% of the time doing tasks and the remaining 30% clearing of engineering debt. So if I had to think of something like that, where I, as an individual contributing to the company, want to learn more at work, then what steps can one take if you want to learn more at work at your workplace?
who
Yeah,
wants to go
Tanmay, you
first?
want to go? Yeah,
Start
Tanmay.
calling out
Okay.
line of your
Whoever
question.
has a phone.
Sure, I can and my context is a little bit different because I haven't. Sorry, there's is that.
I'm sorry, I'll mute myself. Someone is
Oh, no
honking.
worries, no worries, no worries.
Okay.
I thought it was a train. I can't believe there was somebody
Yeah.
honking. Go tell them to go
Right.
quarantine themselves, man. What is the
Yeah,
what is this?
even I thought it was like a train.
Yeah, I thought it was like a train. I was like, hey, cool, trains are running. But yeah,
Maybe that is what Modi is saying for everyone to honk now, I think. Sorry.
yeah. It's like petals everywhere honking. It's crazy. Anyway, sorry. So I think a, mm, my first hand kind of advice on this might be a little bit uh, mm, uh, different because from a personal point of view, like I said, right, like because of the because I've kind of been in that founder role for a while. um, for me it's not like I have the time to learn anything on the side. I just have to learn on the job, and that's kind of the nature of the job. But I think what I have seen from, like, I can speak to like what I have seen from some of the folks who work with me, some of the most productive folks and some of the folks who are continuously learning, and what I've learned from them, specifically on the technical side. And I can speak a little bit to my personal thing on the non-technical side as well. But on the technical side, what I've seen is that, one, at work, the easiest way to kind of learn more things is adjacent skills. So at work, whenever you realize that whatever work you are doing, there will always be like adjacent technologies or skills that you will need to acquire to be better at what you're doing, right? So let's say, for example, you're working on the you're working on the front end, and you are not the person who takes care of the build or the CI/CD or the life cycle of like your application, right? And somebody else takes care of that for you. And let's say you will have every team and every engineer will have a dependency on somebody else, right? And one of the things that you can use to learn more is to basically say, what if I was not dependent on them, or what if I took on a little bit of their work, and this would help you learn a little bit, but at the same time it will be it's very nice because you're productive at what you are doing, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be like out of band, right? Otherwise you're kind of like, oh, I have to do this, but then on the side I'm trying to learn this, which is great if you're particularly interested in something. That's absolutely fine. But I found it very hard to kind of build in that kind of discipline to be like, Netflix, or should I learn this new thing? Screw it, Netflix. But so that's why it's very hard to kind of decide that you want to do something new outside. But it becomes very easy, and it kind of fits in with the rest of your like career path as well if you kind of look at adjacent skills. And you will always find adjacent skills for whatever you are doing, right? You will always be dependent on someone or something or some technology, and that'll kind of help you learn a little more. So that I found is very useful. The second thing I found is useful is um, having a side hustle, especially an open source side hustle. So what I mean by that is, let's say you being 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 a part of something, uh, um, something technical outside of work is also very useful because it kind of gives you different context. So let's say, for example, you're a part of an open source community or an open source project, right? Build something on the side, be a part of a small open source project on the side, contribute to a small open source project on the side, or start your own open source project on the side, that may or may not be related to what you're doing at work. And that is also very useful to continuously keep learning, because that gives you even more opportunities for either picking up something new, or then expanding like your adjacent skills even more, because now it's outside skills. So that kind of really helps on the technical side. I can speak to the non-technical side a little bit, but I'd love for the others to kind of talk a little bit more about the technical engineering side, and then
Yeah,
maybe if there's some time.
yeah. Just to add a bit more on the examples of the adjacent skills that Tanmay talked about, I think like CI/CD is one very good point, right? Test frameworks, adding test frameworks or contributing to tests is one thing. Building Slack bots for some alerts, right? Automating some tedious process that your team is going through. Maybe it's build,
Correct.
maybe it's deployment, anything that can help the team. Like you would get the reward, you will get their approval of like you being a team person, and also you learn a lot more. Typically, these things when you're working on these things, it looks like a way different work day than a typical contribution to the main project itself. Uh, and a bit on the side projects thing, I think uh, for me, I had a tough time focusing when I had a bigger side hustle going on. I would be wary about your like time management skills to be like not distracting from your main hustle. Of course, like the work is your main thing also. So it's about like some things work for few, works where some things won't. So I would be wary of it, I would say.
Right.
Right. I think I have a similar answer. What Manideep and Tanmay said, it's very similar. Side projects, side hustle is the thing for me to keep myself motivated, because uh, we developers get bored really fast. Like when there's something happening in monotony, happening over and over again. So it's good to have a side project in the weekend. Like it was just yesterday, I started building a board game, Ludo.
Yeah, I saw that. I
Yeah,
saw that. I saw that. Yes.
so that keeps me really excited, and that also works as a playground for me to learn something new. For example, the side project which I started yesterday, I am using Emerge.js and JSON patches to sync over sockets. So that I have not done ever in the past. I read an article about it about a couple of weeks ago, how JSON patches can be used to say sync data between two devices, and now that's working in my side project. So side project is something which has been the source of learning and also a source of motivation for me. And not only that, I mean, coming to I mean, that's my personal thing, but when you talk about building a company out of a side project, that also happens. Like most of the big projects at Geeky Ants, which Geeky Ants is known for, like Native Base or BuilderX, or a couple of more projects which we are working on. All of them started as a side project, and it gets to a level. I mean, you don't have any responsibility with side projects. So if you like it, you do it. If it's exciting enough, if you share it with people and they like it too, then go ahead and build the next version. If it's not, then probably it can just be sit in the corner and you can work on something else later. So that's my personal part of like how to keep myself motivated. From a company perspective at Geekians, I think as you mentioned, Nitish, we have 70-30 approach, which is again like 70% of the time we work with client projects. So we have both the types of models. Like we have a product studio where we help the clients, and then we have an R&D section where we work on open source. We build little tools to help other developers, and native base and builder X. So we keep shuffling people so that they are interested in R&D as well as the client projects. And we have something similar to what many companies are doing these days. Like Formidable Labs is doing Sauce program, and Spice program by Futurize. So these programs encourage people to contribute to open source, give talks, and do a little bit extra out of their side work. And these companies also give incentives to their employees. So we are doing that at Geekians as well. So both the things, intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, you can say.
Nice, nice. That's nice. That's I think pretty much everyone sort of concurred on the learning part of it. So if you want to pick up something or just in general at work or anything, in your opinion, do you think it's better to go with a depth first sort of an approach or a breadth first? Okay, in simpler non-computer science terms, like do everything, get an idea of everything, or probably know one thing and then go deep down into it and be a master of it if you're learning something new.
I would say that I think I think at work, if you like it, things naturally end up being a little more depth first than breadth first, because just like the nature of work as an individual contributor is a little more focused, I think. But and so it always ends up being better that like depth first ends up being better than breadth first, and in that sense, you naturally kind of become an expert or try to become an expert at what you're doing first, and then maybe become breath first. But I think one of the most important things that I've seen has been very useful for me has I think that focus on kind of like first principles understanding is very important. And I feel so happy and lucky that I got to spend 5 years just learning computer science and all of kind of the underlying first principles and basics before even before getting into the industry as such, right? And that time that it allowed me to kind of look at of that breadth of everything is was incredible. And that kind of set me up for put me in a place where I can confidently kind of jump into anything and be like, okay, you know what, I can learn anything. I just need a little bit of time. I need the right motivation, and then I can do anything, right? And I think building that confidence has been, and building that kind of base has given me a tremendous amount of confidence. And if I had to and I mean, this is very useless advice, because like you're either in a place where you did spend your 5 years or 4 years learning things, or you did not, right? So what you can do now, I think, is if if you can actively make time for um, sharpening first principles understanding, or for like going through if you want to do breadth first, then there are a few first principles things that you can go breadth first on, especially in computer science, right? That like the topic is so vast. Like, for example, most of us are developers, so we don't really understand systems very well. So systems engineering, I think, has been like is a skill, is like as a body of knowledge and skill, has been something that we've ignored, which really helps in understanding things, right? Like just understanding basics of like networks and operating systems and databases is very helpful in understanding overall trade-offs in engineering, right? it just helps a lot. So if you have the opportunity to kind of just join a course, right, an online course, and learn something and pick up one of these kind of core computer sciencey first principles things, if you're passionate about learning and you like that kind of learning, that is a great option. But sometimes the appetite of kind of like learning from a course point of view is a little bit, is not accessible. But if I had to do breadth first, I would do it kind of, I would do breadth first at that level. And so, for example, one of the things would be to kind of go one level lower in the stack and learn those kinds of things from a first principles point of view. The other thing I think that again helps from a breadth first point of view is, for example, like programming languages. I think it really helps. It really helps to know like four or five entirely different types of programming languages, right? Like from completely dynamically typed to completely statically typed to purely functional to logical to like having like a few different kinds of programming languages, and learning them just because they're different is also very useful as a completely independent exercise. Just because there's so much bleeding into ideas that's happening from different ecosystems, and your ways of thinking, that your ways of thinking can become much more flexible if you deliberately put yourself in a place where the world just thinks entirely differently. And so I think that helps. But I think so those are kind of like two examples of like where you can be deliberately breadth first and it will have a good impact on, um, and I think it'll have a good impact. But otherwise, my feeling is that, at least my experience has been that, from a work point of view, depth first kind of becomes more natural, and breadth first a little bit harder to do. Like it won't play well with the work that you're doing, right? Like you have to, as an IC, you want to become more of an expert. You want to contribute better. You want to take up like more ownership of that domain that you're in, right? Like all of that kind of, yeah. I mean, I can see some scenarios in which breadth first might help, but it feels like if you're doing breadth first, somebody else in the team would already be taking care of that domain, so it's harder. Um, and so, but yeah. Anyway, that's my take on it. I don't know. Hope that made sense.
Yeah, I would hit back on something that we have talked before. I would I generally don't get bored of anything until I actually understand why that tool is what it is made for and what it is good for. I think going deep enough when you're learning to get that point, and then you can think about increasing your breadth. I think if you don't go that deep enough, it'll really like wear off faster, I think.
Yeah, I think I agree with both of you. Going breadth first to get the base right is very important, as Tanmay mentioned. And the things what we ignore, something like system programming and how operating system works, and why JavaScript has say event loop, or why this particular example, this particular language is functional. So if you get answers for these questions, then you have solved the what do you say, you can connect the dots between different languages and different frameworks, which is really important. Like, I'll give you an example. It was just last week, one of our Node.js application was failing really bad, and Pratik, who is really good at system programming in our team, so he went into the code and also into the architecture of Node.js. And since Node.js is single threaded, its event loop was getting like out of heap memory, and it was causing the request to be rejected. If he had not learned what Node.js architecture is, and how that interacts with the low level system programming and the memory allocation and all those things, it would have been really difficult. And if we see something else, like which is like say Apache and PHP, so that works in a different architecture and that interacts with the system in a different way. So getting that knowledge on the breadth is really important, understanding how things work. And once you get that, you can be very confident to build everything ground up, be it say a new language which has event loop, or be it a new functional language. But yeah, as again Tanmay mentioned, when you are actually working, when you are actually building, you might need to go depth first, because you are in the zen of building stuff to solve some problem, and you just want to get things to work that time. So when you're building stuff, depth first works, but before that, breadth first definitely works well.
All right. Okay. So then, coming ahead from that, do you think with the breadth and depth first approach, if you go for at work a depth first approach, at some point you will feel, I mean, if you don't have someone to say mentor you or guide you, that there's more to learn, you will feel that, okay, this is all that there is to learn. And then you again go back into that loop that, oh, I've plateaued in my learning. Can something like that happen? I don't know, like a endless loop cycle.
I don't think that happens in computer science and in this ever evolving ecosystem of JS or whatever you want to. I mean, this is super fast evolving. As you mentioned in the very
Yeah.
first question, it can be really
Right.
intimidating for newcomers, right?
Right, true. Then I think when you try to learn new things or at your work when you're implementing few things, this is a little bit from a designer perspective, this question. So, Sanket, I like your opinion on this because I know you do a lot of design. There comes a time where you may get, even as a developer, where you get a creative block where you feel that, oh, the design that I'm churning out is probably the same. The way I'm writing out on my coding style is like being the same. I'm not, things aren't changing much. So, do you think that there's a way to change or to avoid a mental creative block when you're working?
Right. So for the viewers who don't know what creative block is, it's a roadblock what you hit when you're being creative. So that happens quite often to me. I start with some design or some landing page or some really cool and fancy thing, and right after say an hour or two, I lose that say zen. Uh, it usually happens. So people say like coffee for logical thinking and beer for creative thinking. so so and that helps, but again, I mean that's not you do at work. So I usually stop, like whenever I hit the creative block, I stop working on that particular thing, and I'm lucky that I have that freedom. Not many creative people have that freedom at work. And then I switch to the logical part of work because I do both. So I start building the non-creative or the maybe straightforward logical part or the business logic part of the application. And once I hit that creativity back, then I get back to design stuff. So that usually helps me, and it's I think brain works like that. Like these two things, I work in different parts of your brains, right? The creative and the logical thing. It's good that when one shuts off, the other one still keeps working, right? So I keep switching, and I look for inspirations online. I think creativity is again. I read it somewhere. It's all about hiding your sources. So Dribble is a good source. All these platforms are really good source. So you can just go ahead and look at different things or pick up a similar or one of the competitors and go ahead and build things. Maybe. Yeah. I hope I answered the question.
Right. So, so this was specifically from a design perspective because I know you do a lot of design. Then I'll also come to Mandeep. Like you recently mentioned that there was a time when you did a lot of freelancing as well before you started working. So, how do you, if you're a freelancer, how do you balance between uh, how do you balance between taking up new projects and learning more things, that balance, because ultimately your new projects is your source of revenue, of course, because you're freelancing. So how do you maintain that balance that, okay, I should try learning this but also take a new project?
I don't think I'm the best person to answer that because I stopped
Okay.
freelancing because I couldn't find that balance well. But a lot of
Okay.
times the money did dictate
Right.
where when we had to stop working on these tools that help us. So, but these days I would say like it is also part of a developer's journey, right? Whether you continue to work on your main project or you start picking up new stuff which are not part of your main project, what I try to do is find something in the main stuff that you can actually learn. Like adjacent is one part where we already answered, gave examples.
Right.
But introducing something into your main project that makes it better for everyone else, right? The journey, I think initially I would actually straight away add it in and then force everyone to learn. Now I know the nuances of how to introduce a team better, like slowly, so that they don't lose their productivity. Um, But yeah, I
Oh,
think the balance,
oh,
it mostly is forced on you, would say. Like
oh,
in terms of freelancing, I don't know. Initially,
oh,
at least, I wasn't earning much
okay.
because of the lack of experience, and then
Oh,
the
okay.
loop goes on.
All right, and the next one that I have is for all of you because it's in terms of how, as leaders, you can inculcate a work in an environment which strives for learning for your peers and for your employees. Of course, Sanket and Tanma, you guys are CEOs, so it sort of throws light on more to you guys because in terms of leadership, that's what people look at when it comes to a company. Also, Mandeep, you've started leading a team recently, so anyone can start your opinion on if you're a leader, as a leader, what can you do to inculcate an environment of learning in your company or in your team?
Sanket, would you like to? I
Okay,
yield
Tanmay,
the floor.
I would love to hear your answer, Tanmay.
very good. You should.
Uh, I think, uh, yeah, I think it kind of started off initially being a little bit subconscious, but then it kind of became more deliberate as I saw that it was something that was working. One of the things that I've seen that works very well for me is when from a learning point of view is that so learning new things is actually very weird because it's very uncomfortable to learn new things. It's very easy to say, oh, this sounds exciting, so let me learn. So learning out of like your own FOMO or your own desire to kind of learn things is fine, but it's very hard to actually learn new things that are, especially on the non-technical side, right? Like, so for example, on the engineering side, it's fine because you're like, oh, I'm passionate about engineering, so I'm going to dive deeper into this tech stack or whatever, right? So it kind of like fits in with your mental image of yourself, so you kind of do that. But on the non-technical side, it's actually very hard, right? And it's one of the things, for example, like there's lots of things that is very some things that are very hard for me personally are like, I'm um, to do kind of like certain non-technical aspects around, let's say, the way that we set up communication processes, or the way that we set up or to be kind of more outgoing, right? All of these things are very important for me, as that I have to do, that I have to learn and pick up and execute on, but in a completely non-technical way. So the thing that I've seen that works really well for me and for other people is that basically, if you surround yourself with a peer group that is better than you at different things, or better than you, period, and is demanding, right, that automatically pushes you to learn things, that automatically forces you to kind of step outside your comfort zone to learn things. I think the best kind of learning and the kind of deltas that you will see in your career and your life will probably come from things when you step out of your comfort zone. The more and more you stay in your comfort zone, it's fine, you'll get better and better at a particular in a particular domain, hopefully, right? But the kind of big deltas will come in when you're kind of stepping outside your comfort zone and doing things. And I think for that, what has worked really well for like at kind of for kind of leadership roles in the company, and especially for me, has been to have a really really good demanding uh, peer group, right? An understanding but demanding peer group. So creating an environment that is understanding and demanding is a tough balance, right? So you want to have like a mix of stress, but empathetic stress, right, where somebody's kind of stressing you out and saying, please do this, but they're being nice to you, and they're understanding that you have to go through a learning curve to do this, right? Which is very hard to do in a kind of corporate environment, but like in a business environment. But striking that balance is very important. And similarly, I think what has worked well, what to be is basically to create kind of a team of people who are really good at what they do. Um, and who really want to kind of learn things, and when you kind of start putting together a team of people like that, it automatically kind of creates that right kind of learning culture in the firm. So what I have done as one, I have passed on kind of these values and encouraged learning and encourage kind of depth first and adjacent learning myself. But then the other thing that always works better than like me doing it, obviously, is just having your peers do that for you. So even on a technical side, just having just being alongside experts who are really really good at something really helps. The other thing that I also do to help promote this kind of adjacent skill thing that works really well is encouraging people to take up a lot of ownership. And this is very easy to do in a startup environment, right? Like you have to create kind of the right silos for people uh, to be successful and to fail. That you have, if they have control of the entire feedback loop, right, of that entire loop, and you can carve that out per person or per function, right, inside your team or across functions, then it becomes really good, because then it encourages people to take on ownership. And then if people take on ownership, they will learn adjacent things. Like, for example, one of the folks that are in the team is somebody who's just taken on ownership for handling all security vulnerabilities. He comes from a strong, like, a full stack background and a front end and a front end engineer. That's kind of like his day-to-day work. But he's also completely taken on ownership for all of the security vulnerability process, the reporting process, all of that, like, understanding. And so just that ownership that he was able to take on and handle that end to end, right, has helped him also kind of pick up a lot of those adjacent skills and understand, like, a domain that is, you're like, what is that, like, that domain is completely foreign to what your day-to-day work is, right? But it kind of encourages that, if you're able to give ownership, right? So those kinds of things have really helped. So peer group, creating an environment where you can, like, help people pick up adjacent skills, and creating a peer group for everyone at work, including yourself, including for leaders, and including for engineers, different kinds of peer groups, where people can be demanding yet empathetic, and people can be and people are themselves fairly experienced engineers who have the same kind of culture towards learning. Those things are things that I've seen have helped.
I love how Tanmay puts it so well, and how both the companies are so similar in culture. So I have more or less the same thing to say. And I remember, Tanmay, like how you guys started with like having a dev studio and then branched out into a total product company. And Geekians is also doing something similar, but we are not. I mean, our service and the client project company is still going on, and that's why we share so much in terms of how we roll, right, in terms of culture and learning and everything. So I would have the same answer, like culture plays a really important role. And I always, we at Geekians have this equation that culture is always greater than process. So if you set the right culture, have the like right people on the team who are empathetic and also intelligent at the same time, that really helps. And other than culture, there's also a bit of process what you need once your team scales, because in startup, when your team size is smaller, it's easy to do that, build that culture, and if you slowly grow, then it's fine. But if you grow really fast, then you start hitting that uh, culture getting spoiled, and you have to make a choice, like, okay, you want to do it with process, a bit of process, and also a bit of culture. So that's really important. Like at Geekians, we have all the managers are really technical, and they are really good at what they do in terms of like full stack development and whatever. We try not to have like non-technical, just non-technical managers in the team, so that people just grow from one level to another level. But yeah, again, that's a total different conversation of like non-tech versus tech ratio and all those things. Coming to the processes, we have like as I mentioned earlier, we have something like sauce program and a spice program, where we have we encourage people to do more of open source R&D, write about what they're doing, do tech talks, workshops, and all those things. And these work as like inspiration for the newcomers on the team, and they look up to the people who have already done, say, spoke at conferences, or like great OSS work, things like that. So it goes like that for us.
Uh, I think one of the small points I think needs more light is right through my career, I really have learned the most from the people around me. And having that good bunch of people around you automatically helps you grow. You tend to become the average of people who are surrounded by you. And like hiring people with that learning culture automatically brings in that habit into your team, and it also rubs off when people are giving internal tech talks or even giving external tech talks. Sharing what they're learning, I think, really multiplies. A lot of times we work in huge projects, and what helped us easily is sometimes people are just trying to find the topic they want to talk about, and it is easy to just ask them to talk about the things they've already built, which will give rest of the folks knowledge about the entire system. helps them make it better even more, and inspires them to share what they have in stock.
All right. I like the talk point of view that Sanket you mentioned. It reminded me there was once I think one of the conferences or meetups in Mumbai I had visited, and one of the speakers, the last slide right of it it was just one couple of words, and it said that you want to learn something new, give a talk. So it's quite nice because people first get a little intimidated for the public speaking part of it. But if you just want to learn something new and propose a CFP or something, you'll automatically end up learning something so that you can give a talk, right? Uh, so yeah, so then in addition to the public speaking part of it, we also then come to learning outside of work, which is in your own free time during during the weekend or things like that. So this is of course a question which not only me, a lot of people will have, that what impact can a side project have on yourself? Because a number of times you learn something, you read something, and you say want to implement like a side app or some project, and then at least this happens with me, that you feel, oh, this thing is already been made by someone else, so why should I spend time making it again? How do you keep the motivation going for side projects so that it aids your learning? Anyone can start. Anyone. Well, I'll let Sanket start because everyone
Yeah.
tells Tanmay to start.
Yeah. So side projects, I think Tanmay said that it was Hasura was one of the internal tools what they built. I'm very sure that it would have started like just a small module in one of the projects, and later it scaled. So side project has that scale of building companies, right? But with zero responsibility. That is really cool, right? You don't have responsibility. You just keep building. Don't stress too much. Just don't worry too much. Just go ahead and keep using it, keep evolving it. If you see, look at native base was also a little module in one of the React Native applications what we had built in 2016, and it was it's and even the first version was really crappy. It was not at all good, but we still pulled out the components from the React Native application and put it out in a separate npm package, and we kept evolving that. So that really works. Side projects can be a great open source contribution from your company, or it can be a total new company like BuilderX altogether. Like we are branching out BuilderX as a separate company now. So yeah, I think it's really impactful and really important to have great side projects.
I mean, I let you guys, the Tanmay and Mandeep also to speak. Just adding to that, at times when you're making a side project, you get a feeling that one, it'll be left in a state where it's never complete. Like the idea just came to you overnight and you implemented it for 2 days, and then it's just gone down the drain types. And the other point is, you actually, even after building it, you feel that will anyone ever use this? So that actually, at least for me, at times it's a deterrent that you feel like no one is going to use this, so why make it type. So I mean, does
So
that happen with you guys, or what do you guys do in such cases?
yeah. So the first part of the question, I think, as I mentioned, it's zero responsibility. So you don't need to worry about that. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, don't worry about it. Move on and do the second one or third one. The second one, like, will people use it? That's a question which everyone has when they're working on some new OSS or contribution. So if you are able to use it in one of your projects, if you are able to solve some problem that you're facing on a daily basis, go ahead and use it, write about it, and then let others decide if they want to use it. And that usually happens if you have a good readme documentation and gif and demo, and you put it out on, say, Reddit and Twitter, and that's enough push what you need for open source. If it is useful, then people will use it. If they're not, then it's okay, it solved, it worked for you, and it might work for you in your next project. So that's enough validation, I think.
Yeah, I think everything that Sanket said is spot on, and I think to add to that, like from my experience of what I've seen as successful side projects in the company are um, basically when developers. So this is something that works well if, like, if all the developers on the team also so there's also kind of a platform component, which basically means, by platform I mean the tooling and infrastructure that the team has to make their own life better. that is a great that is a great place to have successful side projects, right? So let's say, for example, um, so for example, our backend code base is in Haskell, and one of those portions, and Haskell as a language is very amenable to very to continuous refactorings, and to continuously like taking out small things and modularizing it and then converting that into a small like abstraction that can then be applied across the code base. And it can be done with anything, but with Haskell it's particularly easy. But the philosophy there is that, you kind of, there's the code base has become very large and very complicated, and now what happens is that you need kind of patterns, like some portions of the things that you're doing are very inconvenient to uh, work on, right? Like the developer velocity slowed down tremendously, because if you're adding a new feature, you need to be aware of A and B and C and different modules and whatnot, right? So you need a new abstraction for handling that particular part better, right? And so introducing that new abstraction means that you might have to create like it might involve creating a separate kind of a library or a separate internal module, right? And then that thing often becomes like a completely independent library or a side project that actually becomes very useful. And this is something that I've seen that has happened across a bunch of our code bases, right? Um, where it's kind of driven a lot by the need to make the developer experience of building something better, of shipping it, of automating it, like all of those small things, right? That we all talked about. Those are really good candidates for small side projects that also become mission critical. That the path to it becoming mission critical is quite fast, right? So it's one of those places where you can avoid the oh, what if this is useless? But like Sanket said, the risk is fairly low. So it depends, right? So what I'm talking about specifically are like the side projects at work, right? So these are work side projects. So these are like things that you did not think would be a separate project, but they did become a separate project, right? But in those cases, it's very good for it to kind of be like some kind of developer experience automation thing for people inside the team. So that I've seen works really well. On a personal thing, if you're doing side projects, I think going back to what I was saying, like having an open source side project or being a part of an open source side project is a great way to keep yourself involved and work on something that's working. Building your own product is, I think, something that every single developer should do. You should just build and launch your own product. You should just do it. Don't even think about it. If you've not done it yet, just put something together. Get even 5 users. It doesn't matter. It'll just it's just an amazing experience, and it teaches you a lot of important non-technical things as well. So that's a good candidate for a side project, right? Just build any product and just launch it, right? And try to get it out as quickly as possible, and try to get 5 or 10 users, try to get 100 users. And if that's not something that you've done yet, that's a great candidate to have. And otherwise, yeah, of course, if you're interested in learning something, then that becomes a good side project. But all of these side projects really help with learning, particularly I think the ones that can happen at work, because they become mission critical. There's a lot of like innovation that happens on those side projects, and it grows very fast. So creating that environment is good, and then being able to do that is also nice.
Yeah, to answer Nitish's question, where you're thinking about whether someone will use it or not, I would actually focus on the problem that we are trying to solve, right? If that pain point is real, then your solution is actually useful. And the fact that Tanmay mentioned this, right? A lot of successful side projects he has seen is when those projects help the people around you. You have the users right beside you, right? And you understand what exactly are their pain points. You yourself might be a user of it. So that understanding really helps build a good product. And yeah, for a lot of internal tools that we build, we have the users right in front of us, and we end up creating a lot more successful products in that domain. And also they aid in your understanding of radically different things than what your main project is. Uh, it, it it will really I think bring a different dimension if you own it up completely.
I would just like to repeat what Tanmay said.
Go ahead.
If you're
Sorry.
if you're a
Yeah, go
developer,
ahead. Go ahead.
if you're a developer, go ahead and build products. Go ahead and do it now.
Yeah, do it now. If you're worrying about like what side project to do, this, that, the one thing that you should take away from this conversation is like quickly spend this weekend and build off and launch a product. Like just do it
Yes,
off. So
totally, totally. And we have got a comment from my dad. So my dad is watching. Hi.
Oh, nice. Not wrong. All right, so we are into our last 10 minutes, and if the questions there are a couple of questions which are posted on the YouTube chat. This is by Sanket. I think Sanket, you only answer this because Sanket's to Sanket. So he says that some technologies, learning it, Webpack, SaaS, Node, all of it can be overwhelming. So how can you better handle these learnings and be good at all of these technologies?
So go step by step. I think we have spoken about it. Like learn the basics. So don't just directly dive into say Webpack and things like that. So learn HTML, then CSS, then check out what SAS and less solves for CSS. Then check out what frameworks like React and Vue solve things for plain JavaScript. So it's a step by step process. If you directly jump to the say Webpack, React, and say some frameworks, then you don't get the basics right, and it's a slow process.
Right. All right. Fine. I think, do we have any more? Otherwise, I have one for all of you guys. This can be pertaining to not something that you guys have done, but probably some of your employees might think. So a lot of times people feel of doing a remote form of higher studies to learn maybe a master's or an MBA. So was wondering that does doing a remote form of higher studies in by your peers and colleagues, can that also be a way of learning outside of work?
I
Anyone?
personally passed on like higher studies because I felt
Okay.
like in this industry specifically, I think the pace at which we have been evolving for quite some time. I don't think academia actually has caught up or even tries to put you in a higher space. But there are definitely few areas which we actually call research internally in our teams as well, right? Things like machine learning, natural language processing, right, or image recognition, all such research heavy topics. If you want to dive deeper, I think those higher studies really help. But like from where I stand, it's mostly about building products, and most of the courses I saw were little too didn't feel like worth the money that I am paying for,
Right.
and
Right.
also I felt like a real field experience would teach me as much or even more.
All right.
yeah,
You guys.
to add to that, I broadly agree. I think with Mandeep, I think the um, it's very unappetizing and unappealing to kind of go back and study. Like
Right.
my dream is like when I'm 50 or 60 and I'm done with all of this, I will be like, let's go do a PhD now. Like yes, like let's go back and let's just do like 6 7 years of chilled out learning. That but yeah, but when you're in like this high energy kind of environment, it's really hard to go back to academia. I think though that um I, it is not something that I've had personal experience with, but I feel like the idea of learning, um, of like having like one online course that you do, right? Instead of like a degree, but having like an online course that you do that is kind of specific, that either helps with kind of an adjacent skill that you're trying to pick up or picks up with a particular interest area. I don't think that's it's a romantic notion in my mind. I like it. I like that idea. I don't know if it's practical or feasible. I have seen some success stories from my peers, like for example, I've seen some of are some of the folks who are kind of on the non-technical side of things, because the entire company is so technical. They've just been doing courses over the last month, last quarter, and they've just been picking up all of the different aspects of what the company needs to touch on. So they've gotten familiar with development, they've gotten familiar with front end development, they're learning about like kind of like systems a little bit, and they've been doing these courses themselves to make them more effective at their work, right? Because if you're so because you don't have to depend on an engineer to understand what is happening, or to explain to you, or to understand how the developer ecosystem is. So I've seen some success there, but I don't know how it would work for, like, if you're already an engineer, you already know a bunch of things, and then you want to learn something advanced, but I don't know how the time balance and all of that works out. Yeah, but the idea of, like, picking up a course and doing something, spending the weekend learning that new thing, maybe even a day a week, that sounds very appealing to me. Like, if I had the time, I would definitely want to try doing that.
All right.
Yep.
Okay, I think we have one last question that we can take in the time that we have. This is by Shrikant. He says that I would like to ask how to prepare for a tech interview. There are a lot of resources, and for a junior web developer, how does one go about this when you're learning in terms of for an interview? Uh, Anyone can. So when you
Yes.
basically, it means that you learn in terms of when you learn solely for the purpose of an interview. But yeah.
Yeah, that's
What
the like the state we are in. I don't know like how you guys handle hiring into your companies, but like there are two sides of it, right? Few people feel like we don't use DS and algo in our regular jobs. I don't feel it useful. Why are these part of the interviews? Some feel like you will hit a roadblock if you're not strong enough on this. You won't go deep enough into subjects if you don't know this. Two sides of the coin, valid arguments on both, but I would say learning them wouldn't hurt. And a lot of the current state of hiring in our industry relies heavily evaluate faster and more objectively. They I think they this is an easy fallback on them on their part where they test you on your DS and algos, right? And it works for various levels as well, right? If you're right, especially if you're new to your job, like if you're right out of college, like what they can actually test you on is mostly DSNL. So I think it's where the industry is. I think you just have to accept that part of it. You don't feel religious about like companies who are asking these questions. Should I join them or not? Don't feel that much. At the end of the day, all of them are trying to build products like any one of us. And DS and Algo, if you like it or not, it's part of it.
Right. All right. Due to quick last two comments on this, or in general, for everyone, how has this been experience for you guys here today from our respective houses?
So for me, it's been great. I've learned a lot from all three of you. Manideep, Tanmay, both of you were really great, and it was more insightful for me than actually speaking. So thank you so much for this.
Thanks,
Right.
folks. Likewise, and that's very kind of you, Sanket. But yeah, this is great. Loved learning from, like that. What kind of folks, what kind of stuff you folks have been doing. And nice way to start. Nice way to start a Saturday morning.
Yeah,
So yeah,
fantastic.
Right.
yeah.
Right. That's nice. Good. I like this. So the entire thing we discussed, we moved the whole thing from the plateau of learning is, staying in your comfort zone, to learning adjacent skills, to going to a depth first understanding at work, then creating an empathetic learning environment at your workplace, encourage people to take more ownership of certain projects, make them part of the feedback loop. And one very valid point, I think, which I picked out in all this is, like, you don't need validation for building something. Like, just make something and just put it out there. As Tanmay said, if you have even 4 or 5 users, it's good enough. That is validation for what you've done. So I think this is nice. I hope once this gets over, the quarantine and the lockdown is done, we guys should all meet up. This has been nice talking to all of you. When you guys are in Bangalore, everyone together, we can meet up. Uh, anyway, this was good. So anyway, thank you guys.
Thank you so much for
Okay.
hosting, Hitesh.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you so much, Nitish and
Sure.
Awesome.
All right. All right. So,
Bye, everyone.
thank.
Have a good weekend.
Yes,
Yep.
same here.
See you. Bye.
Bye.